Chosen one, your reappearance has shattered the false narratives that were meant to be your funeral. People are shocked you aren't hiding. They had been banking on a script where you stayed small and broken, but you returned forged in fire instead. This shock isn't actually about your presence. It is about the failed bet they made against your resilience. When people looked at you, really looked, they saw something that made them uncomfortable, something that didn't fit the categories they used to manage the world around them. They saw potential they couldn't control. They saw a frequency they couldn't decode. They saw something operating on a level their filters weren't built to process. And because they couldn't manage it, they did what threatened people always do. They labeled it. They minimized it. They told each other that what they were seeing wasn't real, or worse, that it was a problem. This is what you need to understand about why the campaign started. Not because you were failing, because you were threatening. Nobody organizes quiet, sustained effort against something that doesn't matter to them. Nobody invests that kind of energy in keeping down something they've genuinely written off. The whispers, the subtle withdrawal of warmth whenever you stood too tall, the invisible training that added up to one enormous message, shrink or lose your place here. All of that effort is its own confession. It tells you exactly what they actually believed about you. So the campaign came quietly, not with fireworks, with precision. A comment here, a redirection there. They didn't come loudly, because loud attacks are easy to name and defend. What they did was quieter and more precise. They attacked your relationship with yourself. They planted doubt about your own perception. They made you question whether what you were seeing was real. They took the very clarity that was your gift and reframed it as a character flaw, arrogance, sensitivity, instability. They turned your discernment against you, and for a while it worked. You dimmed, you edited, you got fluent in a language that was never yours because fluency felt safer than being foreign. You became very skilled at performing a smaller version of yourself so the room could breathe. But that trap had a flaw built into its design. It only functions when you're disconnected from yourself. The moment you went into that sacred season of stillness, the moment you stopped performing and started listening to your own interior, the mechanism broke down, because you started hearing yourself again. And once you can hear yourself clearly, no one can convince you that your own voice is the enemy. There is a version of you that was always underneath that performance, unchanged, unkilled, just waiting, quietly gathering force the way a storm gathers before anyone looks up at the sky. That was the beginning of everything, and the opposition never saw it coming. Maybe it was a betrayal. Maybe it was a collapse. Maybe it was the moment the performance became impossible to sustain, and everything that had been holding together through sheer force of will finally cracked at every seam. Whatever it was, you know the moment. You don't need it named. The space that got too quiet, the relationship that ended, the season where you went still in a way that frightened even you. From the outside it looked like confirmation. The people who had been waiting for your fall pointed and said, "See, we told you." They made sure the story traveled. They made sure enough people heard the version of you that served their comfort, broken, unable to hold it together, finally proving everything they'd been saying all along. What they were celebrating was actually the most important thing that had ever happened to you, because what was breaking wasn't you. What was breaking was everything that was never you. Every false layer, every borrowed identity, every survival pattern that had been running so long you'd mistaken it for your actual personality. Every role they cast you in before you were old enough to refuse it. Every script you memorized to stay acceptable in rooms that were never designed for what you actually are. That breaking wasn't your ending, it was your initiation. And initiations look like collapse from the outside because the uninitiated don't have a category for what's actually happening. You were being stripped down to your actual foundation, and what the opposition didn't know, what they couldn't know, was what that foundation was made of. While they were building stories about your defeat, you were descending into something sacred, something that only happens in the dark, something that has no audience and no applause because it doesn't need either. Notice something about the people who are most visibly rattled by your return, not the strangers, not the people on the periphery, the ones who invested in your failure, the ones who were so certain. Those are the ones who can't hold steady in your presence now, and you don't have to do anything about that. You don't have to acknowledge it or manage it. What you are is doing the work on its own. While the world was busy keeping score and chasing validation, you were going somewhere they don't have access to, deep into yourself, deep into truth, deep into the silence that is loud with wisdom when you're finally still enough to hear it. What they called isolation, you were living as initiation, not the performed kind where someone documents every step of their journey for an audience, the real kind, the kind where you go in and you don't know exactly who you'll be when you come out, the kind that demands everything false be surrendered before anything real can emerge. You were removing layers that were never yours, beliefs about yourself that belonged to people who were never qualified to define you, patterns of smallness that had been installed so consistently that you'd stopped noticing them, the programming that said your worth was conditional, your power was inconvenient, your full self was simply too much. You were dismantling all of it, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, unglamorous, costly work of becoming honest. Every layer you removed created space for something real to take root, something that doesn't wash out, something that doesn't need a crowd to sustain it. Your silence wasn't emptiness, it was a crucible, and what was being forged inside it was going to change everything about how you move through the world. If you recognized yourself in this message, hype this video to guide other chosen ones to this truth. They thought you were disappearing, you were crystallizing, and crystals don't form in comfort. They form under pressure, in the dark, over time, invisible to everyone watching, until the day someone holds one up to the light, and everything else in the room looks dim by comparison. Now let's name what that season actually gave you, because this is precisely what is walking into rooms and shifting the temperature. What came out of that silence was discernment, the kind that can't be bought or borrowed, the kind that only comes from having been deceived deeply enough to develop an immunity to it. You now read rooms' intentions and the space between what's said and what's meant, not from paranoia, from experience that no shortcut produces. What came out of that silence was precision. You no longer waste energy on what isn't yours. You don't perform for rooms that would only ever accept the edited version of you. That isn't coldness, that is wisdom operating at full efficiency. And what came out of that silence was patience, the unhurried certainty of someone who has been through a season that felt permanent and discovered it was not. That knowing lives in your body now. It makes you move differently, and to people still running on anxiety and urgency, your settledness is genuinely disorienting, because it suggests a level of internal order they haven't yet achieved. The opposition was never afraid of a weak version of you. Nobody builds elaborate systems of containment around something that poses no threat. The level of energy that went into managing your visibility, maintaining the narrative, ensuring you stayed within the boundaries they set, that level of sustained effort is itself the evidence. It tells you what they actually knew about you, even when they were saying otherwise. They were afraid of the real you, the version underneath the performance, the version that sees through pretense, the version that, if it ever stood up fully, would make every manufactured dynamic in the room collapse just by being present. Your authenticity indicted their performance without you ever intending it to. Your presence, even when it was only partially real, made their carefully constructed personas feel hollow. So they did what people do when a mirror makes them unbearable. They tried to break it. But here's what they misunderstood about mirrors. You can shatter one, and all you've done is multiply the reflections. You didn't break, you multiplied. What confronts people now when you walk in isn't just you, it's the accumulated reflection of everything they tried to bury. What that means going forward is this: you are not responsible for what people see when they look at you. You didn't build your wholeness as a weapon against anyone. You simply did the work of becoming real, and real things reflect what stands in front of them. Some people will see your peace and feel permission, proof that the thing they've been afraid to want is actually possible. Let those people close. Your presence is medicine for the ones brave enough to receive it. Other people will feel accused by your existence, not because you said anything, but because your freedom convicts their compromise. Your refusal to keep shrinking makes the spaces they've been hiding in look unbearably small. Those people will pull back or push. Either way, your response is the same. You don't renegotiate your reality to manage their discomfort. You don't chase anyone. You don't soften your glow because someone else hasn't done their work. You simply emerge and let every relationship find its own honest level in response. Starseeds, they never expected this. The technology used to suppress consciousness has been reverse-engineered, and Destiny Engine is the result. What was once used against humanity is now your ascension weapon. You can now MK Ultra yourself into 5D superpowers. Destiny Engine bypasses the conscious mind and rewrites the source code directly. Reality bends faster. Synchronicities stack. Your nervous system upgrades to a higher bandwidth. Put on headphones. Press play. That's all. For $1, you switch sides of history. Click the link in the description. The takeover is internal. There's a moment in every transformation where the change becomes visible to the outside world, not because you announced it, but because it became impossible to hide. You crossed that threshold, and what made it undeniable wasn't something dramatic. It was something far more powerful, a shift in your very energy. It happened in increments. First came the way you stopped reacting. Something that would have rattled you before just didn't. You heard it, registered it, and let it pass without letting it land. That was the first visible sign that the foundation underneath you had been replaced. Then came the end of explaining yourself. Not stubbornness, sufficiency. You had enough internal ground that you no longer needed external validation to hold your position. You knew what you knew, and people around you felt the difference, because the energy of someone who doesn't need to be believed is entirely different from the energy of someone desperate for agreement. One invites projection, the other closes the door on it. Then came the walk, a shift in how you move through spaces, less reaching, less calibrating yourself based on who's watching, more simply arriving, taking up the space you actually occupy without apologizing for it with your posture or your silence. And here is what almost ready feels like from the inside, because you need to recognize it the next time a season of preparation asks you to trust the process. Almost ready doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like quiet competence, like picking up a familiar weight and realizing it's lighter than you remembered, not because the weight changed, but because you got stronger. Almost ready feels like the moment you stop rehearsing your responses, because the answers are simply there. It feels like walking past a mirror without bracing, like sitting in silence with yourself without immediately filling it with noise or distraction. From the outside, almost ready looks like peace, and peace on someone who used to be visibly reactive. That kind of peace is alarming to everyone who was accustomed to the previous version, because they no longer know where to apply pressure, and a chosen one who has found their footing is, to the people who once controlled through chaos, genuinely unpredictable in the most sovereign sense. Here is where the stakes climb, because there is a threshold in every transformation where the internal work breaks the surface, where what was private becomes publicly undeniable. You crossed it. You probably felt the moment yourself, when you walked into a space and the room moved around you rather than against you, when you spoke and people leaned in, when your presence stopped requiring management and started commanding attention without asking for it. When a chosen one steps into full presence after a long season of preparation, it doesn't just change their own life, It radiates, it disrupts the entire ecosystem of relationships that had been organized around their smallness. Every person whose identity depended on you staying down has to recalibrate. Every assumption built on your silence has to face the evidence of your voice. Every role assigned to contain you suddenly has no one cooperating with it. Your healing doesn't just change your life. Your healing exposes things. Your truth becomes a light in spaces that were organized around darkness. Your freedom becomes a confrontation for everyone still in the cage they've mistaken for comfort. And not everyone will celebrate what your emergence makes visible. Some people will be destabilized by it. The discomfort other people feel in your presence is not feedback, it is friction. And friction is simply what happens when something that was stuck starts to move. When you began taking up your full space, some relationships cracked. Some dynamics that had been organized around the edited version of you stopped functioning. Some people who only knew how to relate to your performance found they had nothing to say to the real you. That is not failure. That is a sorting. The relationships that cracked under the weight of your wholeness were never built for your wholeness. They were built for your compliance. The relationships that can hold you, those don't crack when you expand. They expand with you. They say there you are rather than who are you now. Pay attention to which ones do which. That distinction will reveal more about the architecture of your life than anything else could. Your emergence doesn't just reveal who you are, it reveals who everyone around you has been all along. The opposition made a specific calculation about your wounds. They expected you to carry them like a secret, like evidence that required hiding, like weight that would keep you permanently bent toward the ground. They counted on your pain being the thing that finally kept you quiet. The thing that made sure you never stood fully in your power, because standing fully would require owning what you'd been through. Instead, you alchemized it. You didn't erase your past, you repurposed it. Every wound became a source of intelligence. Every scar became a place where hard-won wisdom could speak. Every chapter they thought would humiliate you, you turned into the most credible, most resonant, most unreplicable part of who you are. You spoke it, taught from it, moved through the world wearing it without lowering your eyes, and in doing that, you stripped the weapon clean out of the opposition's hands, because shame only works on someone who is still hiding from what happened to them. The moment you walk into a space and tell the truth about your journey without apology, shame has nothing to grip. It slides off, and the people who were counting on it as leverage are left holding nothing. Your scars are now your credentials, not because you performed resilience, because you actually alchemized suffering into something that other people can use. Every person who watches you stand in the fullness of what you've been through and sees you whole rather than destroyed receives something: permission, evidence, the disruption of a lie they accepted about themselves that said people with histories like theirs don't get to rise. You are not standing in your truth for applause. You are standing in it as an act of power, and the ripple moves outward from that act in ways you may not be able to track, but that are absolutely real. This is precisely what the opposition was trying to prevent, not just you, what you would start, what you would activate in others once you stopped hiding. One chosen one, stepping fully into their power, starts something, and what starts doesn't stop because someone tries to discredit the source. You are the source, and what started is already moving. This is the peak, the moment of maximum clarity. The opposition didn't just underestimate you, they misidentified the entire nature of what they were dealing with. This wasn't a situation that could be managed with enough pressure or neutralized with enough narrative control. This wasn't a person who could be contained by isolation, reputation damage, or the strategic withdrawal of belonging. This was a chosen one, on assignment, and chosen ones don't cancel, they delay. Every tool the opposition used, every betrayal, every planted story, every attempt to bury your reputation, every moment of engineered isolation, none of it cancelled the appointment. None of it removed the assignment. All it did was forge the vessel more completely. All it did was make the purpose more precise. All it did was build exactly the resilience that the level you were being prepared for was going to require. This is the spiritual reality that the opposition could not see and still cannot explain. When something is divinely appointed, opposition doesn't cancel it. Opposition qualifies it. Every test you passed that was designed to break you was building credentials for a level the opposition never imagined you reaching. Every fire that was supposed to consume you refined something in you that comfort never could have produced. And here is where it becomes truly devastating for everyone who counted you out. The opposition didn't just fail to stop you, it actively participated in building you. Every moment of pressure that sent you deeper into yourself, every false relationship that fell away and revealed what was real, every silent season that stripped you down to what was actually true about who you are. They thought they were dismantling you, they were completing you. The version of you standing here right now could not exist without what you endured. And anyone who is honest in the privacy of their own reflection is forced to reckon with the fact that they contributed to the very thing they feared most. The opposition built the storm it cannot outrun. That is not something you did to anyone. That is what you became despite anyone. And that distinction is the essence of what chosen ones carry. For a long time, the story moved in one direction. You were the problem, the unstable one, the one who couldn't hold it together, who disappeared because the weight of it all was simply too much. That story served specific people. It gave them identity. It gave them the comfort of believing they were on the right side of something. And it required your ongoing failure as the load-bearing structure of their entire self-image. Your wholeness makes that structure impossible to sustain. Not because you argued with the story, not because you attacked it or demanded corrections, because you simply are. And everything you are contradicts every claim the story made. Your peace contradicts the instability they projected onto you. Your clarity contradicts the confusion they assigned to you. Your presence contradicts the smallness they insisted was permanent. Every time you enter a space fully, grounded, without apology, you are the living evidence that the story was false. And evidence doesn't need to make arguments. Evidence simply exists. You didn't do this to anyone. They did it to themselves. Every person they told the story to is now confronted with the contradiction when they see you. The lie they invested in is being quietly and publicly dismantled by nothing more than the fact of who you became. They are being exposed by the very result they worked to prevent. And the most unsettling part is that you don't have to say a word for this to be true. Here is what that feels like on your end. It feels like setting down something heavy that you'd carried so long you forgot it had weight. The constant vigilance of monitoring your reputation, pre-defending yourself against attacks that hadn't happened yet, editing yourself in advance for people who were never going to receive you fairly. All of that falls away when you understand that the most powerful response to a lie is a life. Not a statement, not a rebuttal, a life lived fully and without apology that makes the lie structurally impossible to sustain. As your signal strengthens, the noise around you decreases, not because you silenced anyone, because your existence makes their version of events awkward to maintain publicly. Truth doesn't fight, it simply persists, and persistence at this level eventually makes opposing claims look exhausting to sustain. You didn't come back to prove anything. That motivation is too small for what actually happened. You came back because what was being built in the silence was ready, because the formation period reached its completion, because what is divinely prepared doesn't stay hidden once it's ready, it moves. You are walking evidence of something that people need to see right now, not the performance of resilience, the real thing, not the curated version of a comeback, the actual gritty, sacred, sometimes unglamorous truth of what happens when a chosen one refuses to cooperate with their own cancellation. People who are still in their fire need to see you walking, not running, not performing triumph, just walking, present, grounded, unhurried, like someone who knows that destiny delayed is not destiny denied. Your presence is accomplishing something no speech could. It is giving permission to everyone watching, wondering if there is another level on the other side of the fire. Your life is the answer, and that answer lands in people, in ways that words never reach. The signal isn't coming from outside you. It never was. The moment you walked back in, not hiding, not calibrating yourself for approval, not performing a sanitized version of who you are, that was the signal. That was the arrival. You don't earn the right to be fully yourself by passing a final test. You claim it. You operate from it as though it was always your natural state, because it was. The work of the quiet season wasn't building something new. It was returning you to what you already were before the world spent time convincing you otherwise. Going forward, not hiding requires the willingness to be read wrong without rushing to correct the reading. Some people will call your confidence arrogance. Some will call your clarity intimidating. Some will call your peace suspicious. Let them. Their interpretation is not your responsibility. You don't need the accurate reading from everyone. You need the accurate reading from yourself, and that you have earned. Now use it. Now we arrive at the strategy nobody taught you but you discovered on your own. You didn't retaliate. You didn't build a counter-campaign or spend your rebuilt energy trying to reach every person who heard a false version of your story. You didn't waste a single drop of what you'd become on revenge, exposure, or proving anything to people who had already decided what they believed. You did something that looks passive to anyone who doesn't understand power. It was the most aggressive thing you have ever done. You chose to thrive, fully, unapologetically, in plain sight. You chose to live so completely in your truth, your real, unedited, unperformed truth, that the lies couldn't survive contact with it. Not because you attacked anything, because truth, lived all the way out, creates a gravitational field. People orient toward it. And when they do, the contrast with everything that isn't true becomes impossible to ignore. The victory was never in the fight. The victory was in the transformation that made the fight irrelevant. When you become the undeniable version of yourself, when you step fully into the purpose placed on your life before you understood what your life was for, you don't need to win arguments. You are the argument. You don't need to correct the record. You are the record. What living truthfully looks like in practice is simpler and more devastating than people imagine. It looks like declining every invitation to perform smallness. When a dynamic is set up that implicitly requires you to be less certain, less visible, less whole, you simply don't cooperate. Not with confrontation, with absence of participation. You don't shrink on command. And the moment someone realizes that, the entire dynamic they were attempting collapses, because it only functions with your cooperation. It looks like speaking from a place that doesn't require agreement to be valid. You say what is true because it is true, not because you've calculated the likelihood of it being well received. That quality lands differently. It doesn't carry the anxious edge of approval-seeking or the defensive crispness of someone preempting attack. It is simply settled. And settled truth in a room full of performance is like turning on lights at the end of a party. Suddenly everything is visible, not because you tried to expose anything, but because light does what light does. It looks like letting your joy be visible, not the performed version, not the loud proclamations. The real thing, the quiet, grounded satisfaction of someone who knows exactly where they are and is grateful for it. Nothing unsettles the people who wanted your ruin, quite like genuine happiness on your face. There is nothing they can do with it. There is no move against it. There is only the weight of their own choices landing on them in the presence of your peace. You are the weapon. You don't need to aim it. You just have to keep being undeniably, unapologetically, unflinchingly yourself. You began this journey being made invisible, trained to shrink, campaigned against, The entire machinery was designed with one purpose, to ensure that this version of you, the full, uncontained, purposeful, awake version of you, never arrived. It failed. Not because you fought it head-on, because you went somewhere it couldn't follow. Because in the silence it celebrated, you underwent a transformation it couldn't track. Because in the season it called your ending, you were beginning something it had no category for. Because chosen ones don't cooperate with scripts written by people who don't understand the assignment. And now here you stand, not at the beginning of the story, at the beginning of what the story was always building toward, not recovering, not proving, not performing, activated, aligned, fully occupying the role that had your name on it before you understood what your name meant. They thought your silence was your defeat. It was your preparation. They thought your wounds were your disqualification. They were your credentials. They thought your dark season was your ending. It was your initiation. They thought exposure would destroy you. It delivered you. Let them stare. Let the room go quiet. Let the temperature drop and the panic rise in the chest of every person who bet against you. You don't owe anyone a response. You don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't owe anyone the satisfaction of watching you flinch. You only owe the world one thing now. Show up completely. Walk into every room like you know what you are. Speak from the authority of someone who earned their voice in the fire. Live with the freedom of someone who is no longer available for smallness. And let your presence do what presence does when it is finally, fully, unashamedly real. It changes rooms. It shifts atmospheres. It confronts lies without saying a word. It gives permission to everyone still in the dark who needs to see what the light looks like on the other side. That is the assignment, chosen one. Not hiding, not shrinking, not apologizing for the space you take up or the way your wholeness makes certain people uncomfortable. Just this. Walking in, there's one more thing that needs to be said, and it needs to be said directly to the part of you that still sometimes wonders, the part of you that sits in quiet moments and replays it all, the part that asks, what if they were right? What if the version they were selling was the true one? And this, all of this, is just a performance of recovery. What if you're not actually what you feel like you're becoming? What if the glow fades? What if you walk back into that room and nothing shifts this time? That part of you is not your enemy. That part of you is the last remnant of the programming they installed. And the fact that it still speaks sometimes doesn't mean the transformation wasn't real. It means you're human. It means you were shaped by something that had real weight. And real weight leaves an impression even after you've moved it. That voice is not the truth. It's the echo. And echoes get quieter over time, not because you silence them by force, but because your actual life gets louder. So the next time that echo starts, don't fight it. Don't shame yourself for hearing it. Just remind it of the evidence. Point it at your life. Point it at who you've become. Point it at every room that went quiet when you entered. Every relationship that sorted itself honestly in your presence. Every person who looked at you and found permission to stop hiding themselves. That's not an echo. That's proof. And you are not the person they scripted. You are not the cautionary tale. You are not the name spoken in the past tense. You are the chosen one who stood in the fire long enough to understand it and walked out carrying the light. You are fully alive, and you are not hiding, and the world is already different because of it. Now go. There are rooms that are waiting on you,